If you hate looking for a new job, follow these simple steps to spend your time focused on the right opportunities. In this video, we are going to uncover some unique ways to conduct company research. We're going to dive into what to look for in the job description and then focus heavily on the team, the hiring manager, and your recruiter relationship. Lastly, stay tuned to the end for one bonus item. I am so excited to share my thoughts. Let's dive right in. So, item one is company research and reviews. If the company isn't great, no matter how good the job is, it will negatively impact that position. So, let's get past the boring stuff and talk about a few unique ways to uncover some of the items about the company that are going to be important. Start with their website. And one big tip here is how much time and effort have they put into their careers page? Do they highlight employee satisfaction? Do they highlight recognition from third parties, specifically awards like Best Places to Work? Do they offer resources to help candidates like you understand more about their hiring processes and what it looks like to conduct a successful interview with their organization? Creating a great candidate experience just on the website is super important because it shows the candidate that the company cares about those considering joining the company. And let's bring in a fun case study. Last year, I was researching a company that put the CEO's Glassdoor approval rating on their careers page, and they made it clickable. So I clicked on it, and when I landed on the Glassdoor that had that CEO's approval rating, it had dropped by 25% in comparison to what they had posted on their careers page. The overall company approval rating had also dropped significantly, and of course, if you're going to drive me towards Glassdoor, I'm always going to look at the interview reviews as well. And the interview reviews were awful. So clearly, the overall satisfaction within the company, the CEO, and the interview process was trending massively in the wrong direction. And for me, this was a 100% stopping point. In just 5 minutes, I would have stopped considering any role at this company. So let's stay connected and talk a little bit more about Glassdoor. It's not perfect, but it's a really good resource. I do want you to look at the overall company reviews, the CEO's approval rating, and definitely dive into the interview feedback. This will tell you a ton about how the company treats candidates. And of course, while I won't say the questions highlighted on Glassdoor are always accurate, at a minimum, you should at least review them and consider them as practice questions if you decide to move forward with interviews at this company. A few other sites that can provide really good data are TeamBlind, Reddit, and Quora, to name a few. Obviously, there are a million items you can research, but a couple of other high level items to consider are first, just look at the company's stability and industry outlook, what's happening in these two areas, and always keeping in mind the current and future impact of AI. Secondly, networking is a good way to conduct research too. This item is a lot harder. Oftentimes, we will not have a direct connection at the company, but that's the best place to start. So, when I got my interviews at Google, I reached out to a former high school and former college classmate who I found on LinkedIn were working at the company to get great advice. And they gave me great advice. If you don't know anyone, you can still reach out to people in like or similar roles and ask for help. And while the percentages aren't in your favor, insight from just one current employee can be really, really valuable. Okay, item two, the job on paper. When reviewing any job description, here are the critical items I want you to focus in on. It really starts with the role and responsibilities. Let's talk about the most important item here, and that's the amount of responsibilities. So, when reviewing any job description, ask yourself, does this appear to be the right amount of responsibilities for the role? Does this really look like a job that can be completed by one person? Or does it look like you might be asked to complete multiple jobs for one role? And why this is so important is this will tell you not only a lot about the types of demands and expectations a job might have, but also whether the hiring manager that signed off on the role in the job description is going to have realistic expectations of what you can achieve and or what is achievable. You will need to keep in mind the size of the company when making these assessments, as at a startup, you're likely to wear multiple hats and handle more responsibilities, whereas the responsibilities should be leaner and more specific at a big company. Next, and also important, are the minimum and preferred qualifications. Do these appear to be reasonable for the title and role? And remember, usually candidates with at least one or two preferred qualifications will have a better chance of landing the position. I still want you to explore roles where you don't have all the skills and qualifications that will make the job more exciting for you. Next is comp and benefits information. It's becoming more and more common to see this information on job descriptions. And while most of the requirements are only around base salary, we can uncover a couple of items. Does the base salary range align with the market? And more importantly, did the company not include this information even though they are legally required to? For example, in California, base salary ranges on job descriptions are required. So, to me, any company that does not include it is demonstrating some gaps in their HR processes. And while that might not seem that important, something that is so straightforward yet ignored could be a strong indication of how the recruitment process is conducted, and it should definitely be considered a red flag. Lastly, is logistics. Of course, logistics matter. Does the job description mention remote versus hybrid versus full time in the office? Is the office location clear so you can understand the commute time if you do have to go in? And commute is a major factor when considering taking on a job. And one tip on this item: since COVID, companies have shown a greater willingness to hire remotely and or allow for more remote work. So, if everything else looks good, you can always consider interviewing for a role that appears to be full-time in the office or hybrid, but you want to work fully remote. And then if they decide you're the ideal candidate, you can let them know, hey, I can only take the job remotely, I can only be in the office 2 days a week, etc. Item three, the team. So, what to look for in a new job? Obviously, everybody you interact with, the environment, the atmosphere, everything, we'll talk about those items, is going to be critical to determine whether you're going to want to take that new job. So, when specifically discussing the team, we're talking about future team members, teammates, cross collaboration stakeholders, the hiring manager, a critical one, skip leadership, etc. We will also need to consider our experience with all these people. So, just it can't ignore any of them. We want to kind of get that gauge of everybody in the process. And there's one other person we need to consider, and that's our recruiter, because many of the questions we might have at the job about the job start with this point of contact. Of course, depending on the company, it could directly be the hiring manager, but in many cases it's going to be an internal or external recruiter, because they should be able to answer many of the questions you want to uncover about whether or not this is the right opportunity. And this should be happening before you do any formal interviews. So there's a ton of questions we should go through with them. We always want to set the tone with them that we're going to ask a lot of questions, but some of the most critical questions start with foundational questions, such as why is the position open? How long has it been open? What is the level or level range for this position? How many people are currently interviewing for this role? And are the candidates all external, internal, or both? And obviously, if we're asking these questions, we're coming from external. These foundational questions help you establish, do you really want to interview for a role that's been open for 6 months? Or is the level really appropriate for your years of experience, etc.? Then we're going to ask data gathering questions like, well, why do you think my background's a good fit for this position? What are the most critical skills needed to be successful in this role? Are there any gaps in my resume that you see? Are there any themes where other candidates are falling short and or doing well? Can you tell me a little bit more about the structure of the team, the roles, the hiring manager, and then anything that this team specifically looks for from a culture fit perspective? These data gathering questions may establish that the team loves your SQL skills, but you aren't that interested in that being your primary responsibility day to day. Recruiters might also give you too much insight, like the hiring manager is recently promoted and still trying to figure things out. Maybe you've worked for a more junior level manager in the past, and that's not your ideal scenario. Obviously, there's all sorts of items to consider here. Next, interview process questions. We want to find out a little bit more about the specific steps of the process, number of total interviews, what is the focus area of those interviews, if we can find out, types of questions that may be asked, whether those are behavioral, hypothetical, or both. Are we going to have a presentation interview, a case study interview? Will they be done via video, be done face to face? What does it look like at the end of the process? And how long will the process take overall? Maybe you're really active in your job search and they tell you this process is going to take 3+ months and have 10+ interviews. That could be another flag that maybe this isn't what we're looking for in our next job because maybe the timing doesn't align. We don't want to put that much effort into this specific position and company. Lastly, getting back to logistics, you could say something like, I see the position is located in San Francisco. Would it be possible to work remote from San Diego? Does the job require travel? It didn't really say, or it said it required X amount of travel. Does that scale up, scale down over time? Then, of course, you can ask about the salary range and you can ask if they can share any benefits information. You may, with that initial one, just again, going back to it, test the waters a little bit on for location and remote work, beginning to understand the organization's rigidity on this item. It's just a great data point for you, but no need to push that hard at the start unless you simply will not take this job or even explore this job further if they're really rigid on these items. And of course, know the laws, especially in the US, where they may not have to even put the salary range in the job description, but they may need to provide it if asked. So I attached the current laws in the US in the YouTube description below. There's a link to a great article from 2024 that you can review. And one more question while we're at it. Any questions that I didn't ask that are important for me to know? Questions that you typically hear from others, just things I should be considering. This last question could confirm that this is the right opportunity, or something could come up as a flag in this answer. But an open ended question like this could help you decide one way or another. I know that's a lot with the recruiter, but we really need to push our contact point of contact for as much information as possible because this will help us determine how much effort we want to put into the next steps of the process. And lastly, if your recruiter's unwilling to answer all your questions, this is a little bit of a flag too. You want somebody who's going to support you on the front end, middle, and back end of the process. Now let's jump right into the hiring manager. If you are going to work for a corporate job, nothing will determine your success or failure more than your hiring manager. So when you meet with them, there are a few specific areas you want to focus on. First, how do they treat you during the interview process? Specifically, professionalism. No matter what is going on in their professional or personal life on a given day, the ability to tune that out during the interview and give you a great experience is critical. Anything less, you may want to strongly consider looking for other jobs. Secondly, do they clearly communicate and do they do it with enthusiasm? They should be excited about the prospect of you joining their team. Third, do they demonstrate the key leadership skill of listening? Do they interrupt you? Do they ask follow-up questions to dive deeper to show that they were listening, etc.? Fourth, empathetic tone and body language. Empathy is oftentimes the most overlooked and one of the most critical, if not the most critical skill for leaders. Watch for those items. Fifth, expectations. If they spend time talking about the role, do the expectations seem clear? A step we explored when looking at the job description, but something we'll want to double down on in the interview. This also may give us insight into the overall work life balance of the role. Sixth, proactive sharing. What do they proactively share with you about the role, the teams, and opportunities for growth? A good hiring manager should try and sell you at least a little bit on the role. Lastly, your questions. How do they respond to your questions? Are they positive? Are they transparent? Some sneaky good questions to ask your hiring manager to learn more about whether or not the job is a good fit for you. is to ask them questions about themselves. What do you love about the company? What do you love about your job? What do you love about the team? What is the coolest thing you're working on right now? The biggest mistake most job interview candidates make is they make these questions all about themselves, but these questions will instantly help you uncover flags. If the hiring manager brings up a negative tone to any of these answers, it may be time to move on. Lastly, why this works is if you make it to the end of the process and they want to hire you, and now you want to ask more questions, questions that are directed about you and your goals, a good hiring manager will always make time for an informal call to answer more questions, especially if they have identified that you are their ideal candidate. Next is the team members. I don't want you to expect the world from them. Remember, they're not incentivized to show up, but they should, as you, but they should, as you do, have the potential to make their lives easier or worse. But overall, what is the atmosphere they create for you during the interview process? And focus on what they say about things like team dynamics. What's the overall leadership slash management style? What is the company culture like? What is the work life balance like? And if you interview with multiple team members, are they consistent or are they all over the place? We don't always want to allow one team member to skew us, especially if they're super negative, but it's something to consider. And lastly, we're back to similar questions at the end of the interview with them. What do you love about the company, your job, the team members? What's the coolest thing you're working on now? And three additional ones. What do you love about the hiring manager? How is the work life balance? And do you think this company has good career growth opportunities? Lastly, with cross functional interviewers and skip lead interviews, look for similar themes and remember that in any of the interview process, it's unlikely that every single interviewer is going to be great. If they all are, this is typically a good sign. In all cases, try to get a read for the overall environment and atmosphere throughout. Item four, our little last tip and trick is the value of a brand. I know it sounds crazy, but in some cases, no other feedback matters if you can land at a company with a priceless brand. For example, when looking at items when considering a job, landing at a Google, Meta, or Apple, for instance, may be worth toughing out some of the other items just to get that elite brand in your background. Why do I say that? Because you may be unhappy at one of these companies, but it could potentially open doors to a dream opportunity in a very short period of time. It's just something to consider. Does the brand outweigh everything else? And by the way, these elite brands and compensation tend to go hand in hand. For most people, the combination of these two items might be enough to overlook some of the other stuff because these elite brands tend to pay people very, very well. I really hope you enjoyed my unique perspective that I provided in this video. If you focus on these items when looking for a job, you will have tremendous success. Good luck.